This is from an extract of Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel, The Jungle. Have a read of the passage before we go over it. The passage begins by exposing the corruption that arose in America during the late half of the 19th century, a time known as the Gilded Age. In this period, industrial expansion saw only a handful of individuals achieve big financial success, while millions and millions of others were exploited and driven to poverty in their wake. Often, those worst hit by this new corporate America were the migrants, like the Lithuanian family we are introduced to at the start of this passage, who appear helpless, voiceless, and disillusioned in this new country. Initially, we are introduced to this idea through the use of third-person narrator, which creates a detached and fragmented perception of these people, where we know little about who they are and what they think. Sinclair also emphasises his sense of empathy for the migrant experience through describing the family as pitiable in their helplessness, utterly lost, and with a deadly terror. Their naivety is also indicated as they only knew one word, Chicago, creating a huge foreboding for the future of this family, who appear so poorly equipped for this new, ruthless society in which they have arrived in. Clear parallels can be drawn between this migrant experience of exploitation and abandonment and that of the Shemurders in My Antonia, where reference of how an agent had got them into a trap with some officials appears similar to the way in which Krajek manipulates the vulnerability and naivety of Mr. and Mrs. Shemurder at the beginning of the novel. A second core theme of the passage is the idea of migration and journey, introduced from the very onset as Sinclair begins by referencing their passage across the Atlantic. Similarly, imagery of movement and unrest is also seen throughout, via phrases such as tumbled, adventure, and desolate procession, while the flux of industry is also clear, with locomotives puffing and rattling freight cars filing by. This is further emphasised through the very structure of the extract, as the passage itself follows a journey, from the outskirts of Chicago, noted by the exclamation of the official that they were headed to the stockyards, to the arrival of the stockyards themselves at the end of the passage. This motif of journeys throughout the extract has a strong place in American history, being a nation founded off the concept of migration itself. In 1607, British pilgrims colonised the first settlement of Jamestown in Virginia, starting a trickle of like-minded Puritans across the Atlantic. This trickle moved slowly into a steady stream and was then preceded by a great flood of migrants from Britain, Ireland, Germany and Holland during the mid to late 1800s. However, this migration was truly catalysed by the industrialisation America experienced during the late 1800s. By 1892, the year in which the famous Ellis Island Immigration Centre was founded in New York, there were only 450,000 migrants who made the perilous journey to America's shores. Yet by the time Ellis Island closed, just over 50 years later in 1954, that number had reached a staggering 12 million. The journey, which we follow in this extract from the jungle, focuses on the arrival of this family into the meatpacking district of Chicago, referred to in this passage as the stockyards. The Union stockyards were undoubtedly the largest form of employment around the time of setting in 1903, estimated to provide jobs for some 250,000 workers, most of whom were migrants. Soon after its establishment in Christmas Day 1865, the Union stockyards became a hub for meat processing for almost all of America bar the Deep South, rising to its prominence through its geographical position, straddling the west and east coasts with a vast railway network. At one point, the city's stockyards dealt with 82% of the nation's meat, and profit almost always prioritised working conditions and sanitation. Soon, the stockyards became a filthy, fetid place. This foulness is vividly pictured by Sinclair, who spent 4 months himself in the impoverished surrounding neighbourhood known as Packingtown prior to writing The Jungle. The clear contrast between the dirty little wooden buildings, ugly with hard-baked mud shores and a filthy creek, and the hill or hollows the Lithuanian family appear accustomed to, helps to emphasise their incongruity in this unforgiving industrial jungle. The utter infertility described by the parched, yellow land, hideous and bare, also helped convey a lack of opportunity and a sense of hardship which the unfortunate workers of the stockyards had to face. Moreover, Sinclair portrays the insignificance and vulnerability of these migrants, who appear next to big black buildings, where the use of plosive syllables suggests the charring, treacherous backdrop of Chicago's stockyards. Likewise, the scale of its endless vistas and great factory, with its innumerable windows and immense volume of smoke pouring from the chimneys, all further helped belittle this family, presenting them as somewhat drowned by the roar of the city. This sense of confusion is also suggested through the very order of the passage, which sees the first 2 and final paragraphs written about the family in Chicago itself, while the third switches perspective back to them approaching the city, which is seen to be looming in the distance. This disconnected chronology and use of enemesis or flashback provides an additional, disjointed nature to the extract, mirroring the bewilderment of the family it's describing, who stand among its deadly confusion. Furthermore, the tangle of switches and puffing and rattling of locomotives help to epitomise the transience of American cities like Chicago during the early 20th century. These phrases particularly suggest how the rolling out of thousands of miles of railway tracks across the nation ironically gave both a sense of connection, but also a separation and confusion in people who suddenly found themselves thrust into the throbbing heart of America. Throughout the extract, Sinclair presents the urban, industrial America through a largely socialist lens, attacking the gross negligence of big corporations in the meatpacking industry, and strongly sympathising with immigrant families like the one we see here. He directly criticises the corruption of both big business and the state, mentioning the man in blue uniform and the policeman who takes them to work at the stockyards, and the officials at the start who scam them, engendering a rather anarchic political agenda. At the time, Sinclair's publishing of The Jungle actually prompted a national inquiry into the sanitations and conditions of Chicago's meat markets, contributing to the passage of the Meat Inspection Act, issued by Theodore Roosevelt in 1906. Rumours even have it that after reading the book, President Roosevelt stopped eating his customary breakfast sausages, understanding the appalling environment such food was processed in. The passage concludes by offering insight into one of the most defining characteristics of Chicago's stockyards: its smell. Chicago's stench of rotting meat and festering waste is emphasised by the polysyndeton and abundance of adjectives offered by Sinclair, most notably the repetition of odour, seen 4 times in the last few lines. Reference of the smell as rancid reminds the reader of the poor hygiene of these markets, while the use of sibilants in the sickening, sensual and strong smells helps to emphasise the very slimy and deceiving nature of business here. Yet there is also a sense of hope in this final paragraph, as the smell is said to be raw, elemental and crude, suggesting how this pollution was also viewed by some to indicate the foundations of a better, stronger and industrial America. However, the way in which some desperate migrants even drank it in, as if it was an intoxicant, suggests that although Chicago's bright lights may have presented a temporary satisfaction, the long-term effects, like all intoxicants, will ultimately be destructive.